Hello and welcome to my channel. I'm Lincoln, and today we're going to be unboxing and reviewing this printer right here. It's the Elegoo Saturn 4 Ultra 16K. Now, this thing was not perfect out of the box, but I got it running and printing beautifully, and it really is not hard to do. It just takes a little elbow grease, and we'll get into that in the video. Now, if you want to know how to fix the printer, you're not worried about the rest of the video and the intro and everything, I'll have the timeline broken up so you can just skip to whatever section you want to go take a look at it. All right, let's get into this because this thing is a great printer. And FYI, I was not sponsored by Elegoo. I bought this with my own money. So let's get into it. All right, as I'm unboxing this printer, you're just going to see that this is packaged really well. This is the front of it right here with your touch screen. And then on the side, you notice there's no longer Wi-Fi antenna. You have the DC input, USB, and your power switch. And on the back, really the only thing notable is the port for your exhaust fumes. That red and black wire you won't have. That's for my resin lapse cable that I made. And on the other side, just the vent, and that's about it. So here I'm showing you that the little nondescript box. Do not forget to take that out and keep it because it has your drip tray in it if you want to use it. I don't use it. I use a silicone tray instead, which I prefer. This one is just like I said, it's really well packed, and they had everything in there. The toolkit, kind of all your basic tools, the spatula, and really the only useful thing in there. Even the USB drive, it did not last for very long. It only lasted about 2 weeks. All right, don't forget to peel all these screens off, and of course the actual LCD screen and the touch screen too. So here I'm just picking the language, and I unboxed this in my kitchen so I could hook up to Wi-Fi because I don't have Wi-Fi where I normally have any of my printers. Pretty easy to do. Now, here was kind of the first hiccup, and you'll see that the Z-axis checks out, and when it gets down to the X-axis, it stops and it just gives the exclamation point. So that was when I kind of was like, "Oh, already I've got problems with this printer." It worked out okay though. So as this hits, you'll see it in just a second. It was sitting there for a while trying to get the X to go, and it just wouldn't. Which is, if you're not familiar with this printer, that's the part that makes this printer go up and down for the tray for the peel. So it just asked for a system update, and that's what I did. And as soon as I did that, it had me turn the power off, turn the power back on, and it finished its update and did another system test, actually two of them, and then it was finished. So I've not had any other problems. Had this printer for about 2.5 weeks now, and no more issues. So here it goes through the second time, and boom, as soon as you hear that motor kick, the rest of it goes. Lost the footage. Well, I didn't lose it. It was just terrible footage for doing these, taking these out and replacing them with the knobs. So in your toolbox, you'll have the knobs to replace for your resin tank. So throw those in and you're ready to go. Now on here, this is just me just reminding you, peel off all these screens off everything because they have a protective film on everything. And this is just a quick screen test to see how it does, and looks spectacular. Now you notice here you got the max and min line, and even that yellow sticker in the front tells you if you're using the heater, you need to keep the resin between those two lines. I have a feeling at as high as this thing goes, because it gets pretty hot, that you don't want to run that resin low. It's going to probably overheat the screen. So just make sure if you can see the min and the max lines, then you know that you have the tray oriented correctly. And if you're not sure, I'm pointing at the 5 holes in the screen area along with the 2 points for your heater contacts that this sits really well. And I'll demonstrate here in just a second that, if you don't set it in there correctly, it's rocks a little bit more than it should. So it makes it easy to put the tray on and not worry about it, because with a regular tray, it wouldn't matter. So here, if you put it on and it's backwards, it's going to be, see, it wiggles a lot more because it's just not settled in place. There's only a couple pins in place. So just ensure that you can see the max min lines in the back when you set the resin tray in place. And this, might as well just junk that thing. And I was just using a silicone baking tray. Works way better for this. All right, in the settings, you go to the accessibility, and this is where you can turn on the tank heating. Now, the tank heating is usually on, and then the other preheat, you just want to make sure it tells you again, keep the resin between the lines. It's going to try and get to 30C. The only other thing is if it loses power and comes back on, you would have to come back and turn that on. Now, you notice there too, you can also turn the light on and off for the camera in that same menu. Now, for anybody that argues that you really don't need resin heating, it's like you can see the temperature of my shop is really cold. So having that heater is essential. And that's just the camera and the light, which for me is useless. I did actually want to use this to be able to do time lapses, but finding out that, it was Wi-Fi only. So if you're looking for that and it's Wi-Fi only, it's not going to work for you. All right, and here, just showing you the new wings they put on there, and the one-handed operation of putting the build plate on and off is so nice. I love it. I also really like the pour spouts. They work really well. Now, I have noticed you get resin underneath those little caps. So I usually, when I go to dump the resin out, I will pull that off just to keep it out of the way. So much easier to clean. Now, here's where we're going to fix the first issue with this printer. There's just not enough adjustment. And you use a 6mm washer, and I put 2 on each corner. And you'll see where I demonstrate, you want to make sure that those washers slide up and down on that little chrome post on the inside, and it works great. I also recommend that you probably, you tighten all the way down to the top of that tube, then back it off probably 3 full turns. I only did 2, and I was able to get it adjusted, but 3 turns would have made it much easier to get adjusted for you. So just go around and slip on 2 washers. I tried one at first all the way around, and it was okay, but I still didn't have the adjustment, and I got it, but it was really hard to get the paper adjusted. And even then, I could tell that there was still an issue. As many of you have probably seen on other videos, the center of the plate is higher than the ends of the plate where the screws are. So in the end, we're going to end up taking that really nice fancy finish off with some sandpaper. And when you do, I have not had any more print failures that are an issue with the printer and not with my supports. So I have to say it really does work well. And I'll show you that in just a little bit. So here I'm, backing off 2 full turns, but like I said, I would say probably go 3 turns instead. It would just work much better. All right, so here we're going to level this for the first time. And with this, it takes a little time. It goes up and comes down. So the gist of this is you just need to adjust this once you've done anything to this. You want to really adjust it the first time you use it, and I did with the paper. So this is the second adjustment I did on this printer, just to make sure that I had this all set like I wanted. And it shows you on the screen, put 4 pieces of paper on and each corner of the screen. And I didn't really show it here, but I should have, that the center of the build plate at this point is still pretty high compared to the sides. And I really saw that it was about 12 thousandths, which doesn't seem like a whole lot, but that's 200 and I think 96 microns or 280 microns, which comes out to almost 6 layers on your build plate. So think about that. If you have a high spot on your build plate that's only 12 thousandths, and like I said, that's not a lot, but you're actually losing contact with all of your burn-in layers. None of them are going to properly fuse to the build plate like they should. And it's just enough that it's an issue. So here it's pretty cool. The manual leveling, it'll show you this graph as it goes up, comes across and shows, how much pressure it's applying, and it'll get to a certain point that it likes, and then it runs across the side, and then it's done. So that's about it. It's pretty simple. You just want to make sure that once you've done that, you're just adjusting the paper so that all of the paper slides out at the same pressure. And I had really noticed on this left side that it really seemed like the build plate itself was a lot lower. It was a lot higher in the center and kind of somewhere in between on the right side where I'm at right now. So I kind of knew right off that I had an issue with the build plate, but I just wasn't sure. I wasn't really sure how bad it was at the time yet. And this one, I really wish I had shown on camera because I did try it. I slid a piece of paper across the front and it was tight on the edges. And then you could get to the middle and you could basically just take it out, slide it back in, and then go to the ends where they were tight. So that tells you the build plate is just not flat. And even here, I think this is where I ended up like getting a piece of paper trimmed off in there. Yeah, you see it right there in the corner. It was so tight in the corner that I dig out that little piece of paper. So anyhow, this is where I have the build plate leveled. It's supposedly level and it should print perfectly. And it just wasn't the case. I had an issue with the center back of the build plate not adhering properly. All right, so here's another point. This is kind of a mid-sized printer, so remember you're going to need a lot more resin. One bottle, as you can see, pretty much just gets you right up to the minimum line. So have another one nearby because you're going to need more. And here, we're going to show you how to do the calibration. Go into the menu and you can choose between 4, 6, or 8. And it's a little confusing because your plate, so here I have it labeled where it would be. So the back left corner is always 1 and the front right corner would be 4, 6, or 8. So pretty easy to see. And this is what happened out of most of my initial tests. You can see there's just no adhesion and it's only at the very bottom, there's a little strip of where it was adhered like all the rest. So it ended up being that right in between those two center test plates, there's a high spot and then 2 low spots. And I'll show that in a little while when I sand the plate. And, the first successful test in that spot was 35 seconds, which it was pretty brittle. So here, I'm going to make it flat. I got a piece of MDF, some sandpaper, and it took me about 30 minutes. And I got this thing nice and flat. And you'll see just after a few strokes why those ends were so hard to level, because those two sides on the left were extremely high. And I'll flip it around and do figure eights and circles and back and forth each direction. Keep this thing nice and flat. And it's, it was tedious, but it was well worth it because I have not had any issues with this thing adhering anything to the build plate since. The only thing I've had an issue with is, and I'll show that in a few minutes, where I had a few failures and it was simply my fault because I used auto supports and I knew better, but I just wanted to try them out again and lychee and see how they did. And there you can see just this strange, weird, wavy pattern on the ends. And it's basically just however they decided to machine these, whether it was a fly cutter or if it was just a big sander, but it'd have to be a round one, and you'll see the pattern a little bit later. It's just showing you the back of the plate there and sanding it where it has this circular pattern right in the center, and it's lower than the rest of the plate. So, and that back section is the darkest right there. And as this gets sanded further down, you'll see the differences. So that's a fly cutter, and that's how it would be used in a mill. And that's how I'm guessing they did these with a large fly cutter. So whether or not it was just they were trying to use the powder coat to fill in the gaps of an imperfect flat plate. So I just kept going. And at this point, I probably could have stopped right here, but I wanted to just go perfectly flat. So I just kept at it. And it was almost there. And right here, that's it. It took me about 30 minutes and I had a perfectly flat plate. Grabbed a piece of 120, gave it a few figure eights just to knock all the high spots down. And at this point, I do a couple more things to the build plate, but they were completely optional. They're just for me because I like to know exactly where my test plates are or test parts are. But that's a perfect finish for anything to adhere to. You know, some 120, 80, and then down to 120. And it's just a nice satin finish. So gave it a good bath, washed off all the grit and grime that was on it from sanding it. And you would think I took a lot of material off, but there was just a very small pile of sanding dust. Now you'll see when I get done leveling this out, and this was even still with only one set of washers on, and I did redo it with two washers at each corner to give me a little more room to adjust. Because this one I just got it adjusted, but it was pretty tight to get it all done. But you can see here now, I can slide that paper all the way across the front. It's the same tension all the way across. So after this, I had wonderful success with printing. So this is just showing you the very last one where I went all the way down to 20 seconds on the build plate. And I'll show you here in just a second which side is the back. So that's the back side. And it's easy to remember because it's the one that the side of the plate that has a notch in it on the top. And you can see that one has full adhesion now compared to what it was like earlier. And they're all nice and even and all the same. So, I mean, anybody can say what they want about having a sandy build plate. And truthfully, you know, if you pay this much for a printer, I would expect it not to be an issue. But that's just what it is. So I started out with 30 seconds and worked my way down to 20 and decided that was enough. And with these, I think I was still at 20 seconds. And then after this, I decided just for safety's sake, I went up on my burn-in layers to 22 seconds. But here with my exposure test, I was able to get to 1.8 seconds was a perfect exposure. Now this is completely optional. This is just me being a little ADD. I want to know exactly, no matter which way I flip the plate, where test is coming from, what part of the plate, and what number it is, and what exposure setting. So you totally don't have to do this. You're just going to know that the side with that notch in the top of the build plate on the plastic part is the back side, and the back left is going to be number one always. So depending on how many you do, but I just wanted to make it a lot easier for me. And then since all of the Sharpie is going to come off the first time I wiped this with alcohol, I went ahead and just dimpled on the very outside of the plate, which is never going to affect anything. I'm not doing machining parts, so I don't mind putting these little tiny dimples in there so I know exactly where all of my test pieces are coming from, all for exposure tests and bottom exposure tests. So hit it with a little bit of 120 again, just to knock all those little high spots down. And you'll see even when I fill this build plate up to like full capacity, the build plate is actually larger than the exposure area of the printer. So I decided at this point it was time to try, a little bit larger size mini. So I had sculpted this in Nomad Sculpt, decided to give it a go printing it and just see how it did. And it printed beautifully, no issues. And even without using any anti-aliasing on this, the only spot I could see was on the very back where there were any lines at all. I mean, this printer prints so clean. It really does. It's nice. I don't know that the 16K makes a huge difference over 10 or 12, but just the smoothness of this print, you can see right there that there's just a little bit of lines in the print. So, if you're thinking about this printer or you already have it and you're having issues, I recommend sanding the base plate and giving it a shot. So here I decided that I wanted to print a whole pile of minis on here. I went to one page rules and printed off their fantasy set and printed all of them at once. And right here is where I would have had a failure on that one that I just pulled off, that larger one. And all of the prints have printed really well and stuck well. So here I'd use the tank cleaning feature, and super nice to use, but I realized that after I did that, I should have cleaned the vat out just to wipe everything down. All right, so here I realized when I was putting the new membrane in that I did not line up the holes for the heater. So simple enough, just take all the screws out again and flip it around. So at least everything lines up so you don't have extra holes in the sheet. So easy enough, just flip it around and just make sure that when you do replace that you have that lined up perfectly. So here I tried to do auto supports. I had the bottom exposure at 22 seconds, and just for safety's sake, because I know there's a lot of suction pressure on all this. The suction force is the real deal. So it wasn't the problem with the bottom. And then on the second one, I went into the menu and changed the exposure to 2 seconds. And for whatever reason, it just made everything super hard and brittle. I don't know what it did, but don't do that. Don't go into the menu. Just go back into your slicer. And here I resupported it with 1.8 exposure and it came out perfect. Now that spot I highlighted was missing base that I just missed when I did the put these all on. So that wasn't a problem with the exposure or anything with the printer or a failure. I just forgot to put it on there. Totally my fault. So these all turned out nice and flat, beautiful. And I had to go and support them myself. And you can see how much suction is on the bottom of that plate all at once and no issue. So if you're going to have an issue, that would have been on something like this probably, especially if you get up midway. So then I did a nice time lapse of a dragon I found online. I'll put the link in for this if you want to print this guy. Super cool. And this is way small because it's actually meant to be a several piece. And I put it all together, all the pieces together in Nomad Sculpt, and turned out really nice. And then here's the rest of this guy with all the minis. And that's about it, really. This is an excellent printer. It's got a couple of hiccups, just like any printer has a few issues here and there. I don't see any reason to have it, not like this printer for some reason or another. I mean, it really does a great job printing. It just, the Elegoo's pushing them out a little too fast, I think, and just not doing a good job with their base plates or the build plates and making sure they're flat. All right, I hope you guys found this video helpful. I know there's a lot of information I've thrown at you all at once. If you'd like to learn more about digital sculpting, go visit the rest of my channel and learn how to use Nomad Sculpt to print anything you want to sculpt. All right, I'll see you next time.